It's the worst of the CBC for August 11th, 2019. The show where I watch the CBC so you don't have to. And remember those times in the last couple of weeks when I praised the CBC for finally taking an anti-sex trafficking and an anti-pedophilia stance? Well, toss that all out the window, but we'll get back there later. So, you want to know, what was the worst story of the day? And to be honest, if we're going to talk about like the worst, most biased story of the day, it was the fact that they were still covering Trump, and is Trump responsible for Dayton and El Paso? Never mind that Dayton was not, was done by a leftist. It's still Trump's fault. And they brought on two people from the U.S. and it was like a fake news, the greatest hits of fake news, and the greatest hits of all the last week of fake news on Trump and this, and all the most biased reality detached lines, right? Well, it's really his fault because he said all Mexicans were rapists and murderers. It's like, no, he said some people coming across the border are rapists and murderers. They're not sending our best. Like, so it was a fake news greatest hits on Trump, and that was really the worst done. But we've talked about that's been every day. So what wins today's award? They let off with the story that Brian Schmigelski's, that sounds like a backup offensive lineman from the 1970s, by the way. When Schmigelski's father, and this is one of the two teens who allegedly murdered 3 people in BC, he was on a interview with Australian 60 Minutes. And what the CBC decided to harp on and imply is they were asking the father whether he thinks that because Schmigelski played video games a lot and he bought him an airsoft rifle, did that cause the mass shootings? Was this mass shooting caused by video games and an airsoft rifle? We'll never know. We think so, but we'll never know. Did it? Probably, maybe. We don't know. It did. That was the line. So, remember when I took the CBC side, or not really the CBC side, but when Trump said, video games are to blame, and the CBC said, that is ridiculous. Look how ridiculous Donald Trump is. And I said, yes, video games are not at fault, and even if Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Islamist fools, or whoever else blame video games for their problems, it's not them. But we literally had Story 1. Do video games cause this? Is video games and airsoft rifles? Do we need to ban airsoft rifles and video games? Do we need to ban pictures of guns? Maybe. Video games evil? Then the next story, it was like, Trump says stupid things like video games cause violence. Literally! It wasn't even between days. It was first story to second story. They couldn't keep their propaganda narrative straight. So we're going to give that, right? Do video games cause violence? We don't know. Probably video games cause violence. Trump says video games cause violence. What an idiot. Literally the CBC today. Now, what is the biggest omission? No surprise on this one. I think we all guessed it. Isn't it funny how the Jeffrey Epstein story is already out of the news? Now, I was away yesterday, so I was detached. I was up north hiking and running around for a fundraiser. But I went back, so nothing on Epstein today. Absolutely zero on Epstein today. From the CBC. Not a whip, not a mentor, didn't make it even onto the Chiron. So I went back onto YouTube. Funny, interesting point. You notice how CBC News, your comments are always disabled on CBC videos? So much for public broadcaster. Anyways, so I watched a 4-minute clip, and their coverage of Epstein yesterday is they brought in a Democratic congresswoman who is also a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and to talk about, sexual abuse and how bad it is. Again, sexual abuse bad, but not for a second do they even challenge the narrative that Epstein was suicided or committed suicide. Honestly, as I said, believing that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide is the conspiracy theory on this one, okay? The guards were sent home early. He was on suicide watch, camera malfunction. He ties the new set of bed sheets. Listen, page 64 of the Bernie Sanders book of Proverbs, billionaires are not Boy Scouts. Billionaires don't do their own things. Billionaires don't know how to tie complicated knots. You have 1% of people who are tying all the knots for all the billionaires. But seriously, do we really think billionaire Jeffrey Epstein knew how to tie an effective slip knot to hang himself in a cell? Plus, he was on suicide watch already. He was on suicide watch. He had one suicide attempt already, and yeah, he's the witness to a bunch of very important crimes implicating a lot of people the day after all these documents drop, implicating lots of congresswomen and powerful people. Are we really supposed to believe that that's a suicide? I mean, this is probably the greatest day of Alex Jones's life. He's probably, the pedophile running the war. Good for him. But isn't it just funny? And I love it because he says right at the end of the thing, he's like, oh yes, a very important story that we're going to have to follow up on. Boom. Looks like we don't have to follow up on it anymore. Looks like it solved itself. Okay. Out of the news. So there you go. All in all, I'm going to give today's episode, or today's hour, 8 out of 10 Rosemary Bardens. Actually, you know what? Because of the 9 out of 10 Rosemary Bartons. Today's episode gets 9 out of 10 Rosemary. You know what? Because it's a pedophile thing, we're upgrading it. 10 out of 10 on the Rosemary Barton scale. Just because because of the Epstein thing. 10 out of 10 Rosemary Barton scale of bias for today's episode of the CBC. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you tomorrow.